Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Laboratory of the Future 2025. So, my name is Princess Senate, and I'll be moderating today's event alongside my colleagues George Hammond and Heather James. So, before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes to go through. So, to respect the valuable time and intellectual property of our speakers, please refrain from recording any of the talks. Slides will be available for download in the literature section of the platform. We strongly encourage networking and lively discussion, so please use our platform's networking features to connect with other attendees. However, overt solicitation of products or services is strictly prohibited. Any user who violating this rule may be blocked from the event. Also, a big thank you to our sponsors, My Green Lab and Integra, whose support made this event possible. For event tips, check out the overview video on the event homepage or visit the FAQ in the left-hand menu. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into today's opening session, a panel discussion on AI in research. So, in today's rapidly evolving scientific landscape, artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic concept, but a powerful tool transforming the very fabric of research. So, we have distinguished panels today that are going to bring multifaceted ways AI is revolutionizing scientific discovery. Before we start the discussion, let me first introduce our esteemed panelists. So first up, we have Eric Vaughan, CEO of IgniteTech and GFI Software, a visionary leader driving AI-powered transformation and innovation. So Eric, would you like to please tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise?
Sure, be happy to. Thank you, Princess, and welcome all viewers from all around the world. It's always excited to be on these forums with panelists and other esteemed members of the community. Seems like we're talking a lot about AI these days, doesn't it? So I'm Eric Vaughan. I'm the CEO of IgniteTech and GFI Software, two completely different companies, but under the same umbrella. IgniteTech is an enterprise software company that has global customers that are very horizontal, cross-industry, very large organizations, many names, of course, that people would recognize. And GFI Software is an IT solutions provider that provides solutions to small and medium businesses around the world through a network of distribution and reseller partners, so completely focused on the channel. But the thing that ties us all together is we run the organizations with the same ethos and the same intentions. And over the last 2 years now, I have to keep adjusting that language. It was a year, then it was a year and a half. We're now 2 years in. We have completely transformed our organizations into what we call an AI-first organization. And what that has meant is, first of all, an enormous amount of investment in our team in terms of training, in terms of tooling, funding for education, for access to AI tools, and then even so far as spending one quarter where we donated 1 day per week. We called it AI Mondays, where all anybody was allowed to work on were AI initiatives. Because we believe that this change that has come to us in the last couple of years, really sparked by Gen AI, adding on to the AI ML industry, is such a transformative change that it's almost existential in terms of a number of organizations. Meaning, if they don't get on board and get very busy and very active with this, they risk being left behind or being eliminated completely. And so we've spent a lot of time doing that, and that resulted in us needing to change out a large number of our team because some of those cultural changes and the emphasis changes didn't work with the people that were originally here. So over the last year, we've been making those changes, and we continue to advocate that from the CEO down at organizations, that this become a very primary focus of all companies, and whether it's a for-profit company or even in the research communities, which I think is a real focus today, it just couldn't be more important to embrace that. So I'm looking forward to a lively discussion with my fellow panelists and questions from the audience. Thanks for having me, Princess.
Thank you so much, Eric. So next up, we have Sid Rao, CEO of Positron Networks, a seasoned technology leader with a proven track record of scaling transformative solutions at companies like AWS, CTI Group, and Microsoft. So Sid, could you share a bit about also your background and your contributions to the field?
Sure. Thank you all for having me. And it's exciting to be on a panel talking about the laboratory of the future. Positron Networks is a startup that my co-founder Curtis Hartman and I started last year, focused around making scientific computing accessible and easy to use by researchers. We began our journey by engaging over 100 research institutions and labs across the United States, from Boston University to the University of Illinois, to a variety of private and enterprise research labs. And a consistent theme we heard was the infrastructure required to power models, to train models, to develop and use AI in a consistent way was simply inaccessible and difficult to use by scientists who really wanted to just focus on the science. So if you're a computational biologist and you want to train a model using AlphaFold, gaining access to a GPU, being able to train using a data set and collaborate on that data set, and then simulate a protein folding in Venture in a particular environment was just simply too challenging to do. So Curtis and I set about trying to solve this problem. We collaborated with Boston University to launch Project Robbie. Project Robbie is a simple service that allows you to gain access to the latest scientific computing tools with 3 easy steps. All you need to know is Python. You require no developer operations support or IT support to use the service. It's a self-service platform. And one of the crucial aspects of Robbie is we've made scientific computing accessible to the student who only may have a couple $100 to invest in their project, all the way to the most advanced labs that want to train a foundation model who have millions of dollars at their disposal. So we're super excited about empowering researchers with the latest infrastructure to run and use and train the latest models and bring AI to the 7 out of 10 researchers who want to use AI as part of their research strategy and roadmap. So thank you again for having us, Princess, and appreciate it and look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks, Sid. So next up, we have Dr. Jericho McLeod from Elder Research, who's an expert in leveraging AI-powered solutions. So I guess I'll hand over to Jericho to introduce himself to our viewers.
Thank you, Princess. So I am Jericho McLeod. I'm a principal data scientist at Elder Research. We're a consulting company in the data science, machine learning, and AI space. We've been in the business for about 30 years, and we frequently work with government clients, although we do have a fairly large-sized, or for us, a fairly large-sized private sector consulting arm. And lately, a lot of our work has centered around AI models, leveraging them on behalf of our clients. In addition to this, I am an adjunct professor at George Mason University and an active researcher. And in the course of my research, I have been leveraging AI to improve the results, to ideate. So I bring a bit of grounding to this discussion, I think, beyond just the strategic direction for things. I've actually applied some of the things that we'll be talking about myself and can speak to the actual experience in firsthand research. So really excited to be here, Princess. Thank you for having us and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jericho. So finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michelle Ottey from the Cambridge Innovation Center. Dr. Ottey is a renowned expert in lab management, and she's also joining us as a chair for this discussion. So I'll hand over to you, Dr. Ottey, to introduce yourself and share a few words about your background and your expertise in the area.
Sure. Thank you, Princess. So as Princess mentioned, I am the Vice President of Labs and Centers for Cambridge Innovation Centers. And my background is actually in cancer biology, and then I shifted into reproductive biology and joined CIC 3 years ago, overseeing each of our centers specifically with expertise in lab oversight, operations, and management. I was and am an amateur AI user with very little formal training. I am completing the MIT Sloan AI in Biotech and Pharma course right now, which has been fascinating and eye-opening. It's something that I have pursued and really worked to educate myself on, because so many of the client companies that we serve at CIC are employing AI in their workflows. And it's a topic that you can't escape from. It's really fascinating and exciting to see where this can take us. And so I'm really honored to be here to moderate this panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and welcome everyone, our panelists, our viewers, for tuning in. So to get us started, again, I'll just throw it all back to you again, Michelle, to frame our first topic of discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Princess. I would love to start by talking about how AI is revolutionizing research, specifically how AI is making significant strides in optimization of data analysis, generation of hypotheses, and in optimizing our experimental design. It's an area where AI has already had a major impact. We will have time later in the session to talk about our trend, like the trends that we've observed. But Jericho, I'd love to start with you. You and your company have been really at the forefront of applying AI to streamline workflows. Can you, as an applied scientist, tell us how AI has transformed the day-to-day work for you and your fellow scientists?
Absolutely. So one of the key things that we see in more recent years is just the rapid growth of data. And as the landscape of information we need to be aware of to do research, to leverage the tools we have, broadens. Using AI allows us to distill this down. So when we apply this to research, if we look back 40 years, we may have only had to read a few papers to know what the latest research was in our field. Now it can be a few thousand just after a few months. AI has the ability to distill this down and to tell you which ones are relevant to your current research. And beyond that, given your current research, if you don't have a direct hypothesis already in place, you can have a discussion. You can talk about things. And then when something strikes a chord, you realize, hey, there is some new research happening that facilitates the use of data that I already have, or some resource that's already available to me. You may not have been able to connect that dot if you were trying to read through the thousands and thousands of papers coming out on a regular basis. In addition to that, we see more smoothing of the methodologies that we apply. And I say smoothing loosely here. And what I mean by that is, in the past, I may have applied a method that I was aware of, and over time, gotten review and eventually found out I needed to adjust this. And so it could be a bit of a bumpy course trying to apply good scientific, rigorous methodology. With AI, I can describe my experiment, I can describe my data and describe my methods and ask for feedback and generally get a quite good set of recommendations to investigate. I may not use this directly out of a model, but I can take those things and then read just a small selection of very relevant papers, discuss them with my peers, and move forward with my research.
That's great. And you've really touched on one of the key points that I have taken in learning about AI application, which is about efficiency and optimization of processes. Do you have any experience with robotics or automation in terms of improving efficiency of specific workflows or potentially reducing human error that can occur in the lab?
Absolutely. So the most recent example that comes to mind was research at scale, where we had millions of plain text human authored documents. And these would have specific pieces of information consistently across all of them. And we needed to extract this information to model human behavior at scale and during a pandemic. In order to actually perform that, we needed to extract all of the people, and we needed to map their relationships to one another. So we needed to create this knowledge graph of these individuals. This is a very time-consuming task for a person. We hand annotated some of these and then decided this was one we needed to leverage AI for. So we were ultimately able to process more than 21 million individuals through a system like this in an automated fashion. It took maybe an hour of human time. So this is the kind of automation capability that we're introducing with this. We can take these difficult, unstructured text problems and just using a large language model as the particular subset of AI in this case, we can reduce this problem to a very minimal task.
That's great. That's fascinating, Jericho. Thank you so much. It's incredible to hear how AI can really address bottlenecks in different workflows that we're all facing. Eric, from your perspective in tech at an, as you called it, AI first organization, I'd love to move the discussion into more of the ethical side of applied AI. AI's power comes with a lot of responsibility, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how we can ensure that the algorithms that we're using, the models that we're using, remain free from bias and maintain transparency. And then take it one step further, how do we navigate the broader ethical concerns like the impact on workflow and workforce?
Sure. I love the phrase in your question, remain free from
Yes.
bias, which implies that they're currently completely free from bias, which is completely not the case, of course, right?
Yes.
I mean, everybody, I'm certain that a lot of people by now understand that the amalgam of mountains of data that have trained these LLMs that we're all relying upon for any number of things come from the consumption of us.
Right.
And the curation of the consumption of us is an interesting point of view, right? And we are seeing this debate industry wide. I know we're talking about research and workflows, and I loved the response that Jericho just had, talking about sifting through and then having a discussion. I love that he said having a discussion. I didn't want that to be lost on everybody, that what he meant was talking to the LLM. Mm-hmm. This amazing, really willing, incredibly informed assistant that's just there to please 24/7 in any language you'd like, right? And we've never, whether it's research and science or it's workflow automation at a company, we've never had so much help in our lives. And we literally don't ever have the ability to say, I don't know anymore, because with a simple query, you can get the answer. What does this mean? What does this term mean? I just heard someone mention this on a research paper. What does it mean, right? It's incredible. The ethics side of it is fascinating. And we're watching the world, and I say the world, wrestle with this because it's a global problem and it's a global challenge. And AI bias is inherent in the way it is being built. And there's a raging debate that most people are likely aware of about closed source and open source LLMs, right? So closed source are proprietary. You don't get to see the weights and how it's it's actually tuned. That's OpenAI, certainly subject of a lot of litigation and controversy right now with that, with Elon Musk and XAI. Then on the other spectrum, you've got Llama coming from Meta, which espouses to be open so everybody can see how it's built. And this goes back to the whole debate about open source versus closed source, right? If you've got a company whose primary motivations are financial and profitable gain, how do you know that they're actually trying to make it available for everybody on an even keel? So, one of the most important discussions lately is about agents or agentic. And you could almost imagine a battle of the LLMs, right? You could imagine a framework that's going to develop where you could have a conversation with OpenAI's LLM, ChatGPT 4.0 or Pro or wherever you are, and pit it against Meta at the same time. In fact, there are tools being developed that are doing those things. So you get contrasting points of view. And I think that can help people sort bias out, right? In a number of different places. Transparency is very important. And it's not just about transparency. It's a word everybody loves, and I certainly agree with it, but it sometimes I think is a little bit misunderstood. Part of what we're doing with our customers is educating, because it's not about being transparent, because we can tell them we don't retain your data and use it for training purposes, but they literally don't know what that means.
Right.
And we have collectively frightened the world that everything you type into one of these tools is being consumed and sold and read and tagged to your name and used for identification purposes, and they're just freaked out. And so we educate our customers and tell them exactly what it means. How does it work? And I think that's super important for any organization, company, whether nonprofit or profit, to say, here is how we're using your data, and in layman's terms that can be, consumed and understood. So the AI bias problem, I don't think we're going to regulate it. And that really worries me, that different parts of the world are trying to regulate that. I don't think that's going to work. What will work ultimately is a market-based solution. Like I said, maybe a battle of the LLMs, where you take the different opinions and collate them and say, I think I've found the greater truth. This one had this particular bias. This one has a different bias. That's interesting, right? So we've got fun times ahead. I think regulation's not the answer. I want to be really clear about that.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That's really interesting. And you raised some critical points. I think, in terms of the data sets that are being used for training, when it comes to drug discovery or clinical trial optimization or patient stratification, I think going in with an intentionality about the data that you're using to train, to have diverse data sets that are representative of the populations that the end product will be applied to, is going to be critical in that process. And I am fascinated, in my background, having dealt a lot with FDA in the reproductive world. I am fascinated by the discussions around regulation of AI and, AI-derived potential drug candidates, and are they acceptable to move forward with in clinical trials? So like you, I'm fascinated to see the direction that we're going, and how regulation, because there will be some, is going to play a role in all of this.
I think it has to be community led, though. And when I say community, I don't just mean the companies that are making the tools available, the community, the people that are using them as well. It needs to be a community sourced solution. I mean, less pervasive and less impactful in terms of maybe on all of humanity is, the internet and TCP/IP and the underpinning technology behind the internet. Still it's regulated, but it's still very open. And the community has solved all the problems of how do we have internet connectivity on a worldwide basis and provide that, right? So that's got to come from the community. And to the point of regulation, Michelle, how are these people going to know enough to regulate? That's what I always struggle with. And that's not to discredit them, but if they're not specialists, I mean, they're asking questions that are very basic at this point, which a lot of people are. There's a question, I see Q&A from one of our attendees asking about, LLMs always giving me wrong information. Right? I mean, that's where we are. How are you going to regulate something like that without that kind of expertise? So I look for the community to find that problem, to fix that problem, not government regulations.
Yeah. I'd love to open this up. Sid, Jericho, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges right now is when we say AI, we often continue just to link it to LLMs. And one of the ways to get bias out of it is to drive models that are really well tuned and tailored to the data set. So if you look at something like AlphaFold, which is used for protein folding simulation today, it's not a traditional large language model. It uses concepts of LLMs, but it also joins with it tailored algorithms focused to the data set. And that tends to help eliminate bias, because you're no longer just using what one researcher said or some language-oriented concept to drive linkages between parts of the data set. So building tailored models for specific disciplines and tailored foundation models for specific disciplines is a critical part of the story. But as Eric noted, today that's not a very democratized concept. It's not a community-driven concept. Training a foundation model is super expensive, and it's limited to the haves and have-nots. The likes of a Meta or a OpenAI or Anthropic are able to build these kinds of foundation models, or on Amazon. And it's very difficult for foundation models to be built by open public research institutions or national labs or governments, who are also less susceptible to commercial bias and other influences that are out there. So while I don't think the public should really get in the business of trying to create regulation, because that's very tricky, and applying it across multiple disciplines is pretty challenging. Making the right funding, budget, commercial, and technology solutions in play so that foundation models can be developed by any researcher and tailored to specific data sets is going to be crucial, because the final thing I've learned personally over the last year is about 20 years ago when neural networks first came out, everybody tried to use AI to model everything from rainfall to DNA predictions to how proteins will fold, but the computing infrastructure wasn't there. The algorithms weren't there. The underlying software layer wasn't there. Now we have the software layer, and it's created almost a reawakening of every researcher looking at an old data set they had, petabytes of data they've collected over the years, and seeing how they can now reapply AI. Unfortunately, though, we've kind of got a concentration of models that they can source from to do that training and prediction. So we need to open that up, and we need to make sure that a lot of these AI hubs that are being funded by the federal government across various different local regions and territories have the right software services, training, developer support, tooling, and also funding to ensure that, if you're a biologist and you have a very specific data set focused on, a mRNA sequence that you collected, petabytes of data for, you can go forth and train your own foundation model and not be restricted just trying to adapt something that, adapt a hammer to drill a hole, right? And that's what it feels like still a little bit, is we're adapting existing models because we don't have the mechanisms to create new models. So bridging that gap, closing that gap, I think is going to be super critical to getting rid of this error and bias question. Or I don't think we'll ever be able to get rid of it, because ML is traditionally a probabilistic mechanism, but limiting the impact of hallucinations and bias in making predictions. Anyway, I thought that would be maybe something useful to the conversation.
Absolutely.
And I can add a bit to this. I think when we talk about regulating models, I would say that the model itself is not really the thing to regulate. It's the result of a mathematical system you've constructed around some information that you have. We already have regulations around things like fairness in certain situations. We have quite an extensive legal code. We can still apply that to the outcomes, to the application of results from a model. So if you have just a very simple system that says, how many dollars to put in a bucket, but there's a law that tells you can't go over a certain number of dollars, your model might tell you to put $1 extra, right? And it's up to the user of this model to know not to do that. If we try to include burdensome regulations in the construction of models directly, we could run into problems where we just make worse models and all of our answers that come out of them suffer. So that's a potential concern. Then the flip side of this, if we already know what our constraints are, what our regulations are, we need to examine our models for bias. And when we get results out of them that don't meet our legal code, that can be an indicator to us to go back and look at what we're feeding in. So this can be a way that we use to identify bias in our prior data, our training data.
Yeah, I hope. Go ahead, Sid.
No, I think, really crucial point is the industry is now starting to apply concepts in computer science around correctness and analysis tools to ensure that the outputs of models can be basically automatically verified for compliance with policies. And if they're not, ask the model to repredict and regenerate results. So to Jericho's point, we often just look at the weights in the model as kind of the center, but we really need to look at it as more of a pipeline, which, yes, data is one part of it, but I think there's a layer of computational algebra and other techniques that can be applied to ensure that, the result that's coming out of the model is verified against those strict doctrines. And if it fails, ask for regeneration. And, while the expense of model execution might go up because you keep on asking for a new answer, from the model, ultimately you'll reduce your error rate, and that reduction of error rate and reduction of bias and ensuring automatic compliance with legal and policy doctrine is super critical. So there are automated ways now that every foundation model is now looking to inject to ensure, actual mathematical proof level quality compliance with policy documents and policy statements that already exist, as Jericho said. Although there is a burden of coding the policy documents that are written up in many laws and ethical doctrine, and converting that into the kind of the algebra that I'm describing. But if we can go through that effort, we will be able to benchmark and raise the bar of quality that these models produce, and eliminate bias as well.
Yeah.
And just one other point, Michelle, if I could add,
Sure.
one of the things that I think is really important for everyone to consider is AI isn't taking over. It is not time for us to just submit to AI and it tells us what to do. Like the concepts of hallucinations and it gives me wrong data. So often, after years now of practicing this and working with people, I dive in and I say, well, what do you mean by hallucinations? So, well, I asked it to write a paper that sounds like me and it doesn't sound anything like me. And I said, well, what examples did you give it? Did you give it like a library of your past 30 papers that you wrote so it understands your vernacular, your area of expertise, your opinions, your voice? No, I just simply said, I need to write a paper and I'd like you to write it like me. Like this, and I'm using an extreme example, but we can influence the result or the output is the word I'm looking for from these interactions with AI by doing the work. And ultimately, humans are the one that need to control the AI, not the other way around. And somehow there's been this belief that just bring up a chat window and ask a question and your work is done. It's not going to be that way. Right.
Yeah, Eric, you hit exactly on the point that I was going to say, which is there is this misconception that the use of AI and applied AI in research in any field is that it's going to replace human beings. And I think what each of you is making very clear in your points is that it is actually an interplay of the human expertise with the AI tool. Sid, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this. You've been a leader in this space, making AI more accessible. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you see AI as enhancing a human workflow rather than replacing it.
Yeah, I think, ultimately the reason why you see so much about AI replacing workflows and being kind of the master of decision making is because right now it's so expensive for these models to be created that the only way to get a return on investment is if AI can actually replace the human being that's doing the work. And look, I think that has a lot to do, less to do with, I would say, questions around, how is AI difficult to use or is it inaccessible or things of that nature, as much as packaging up the right tool set so that the skill level of a scientist matches the capabilities of the tool set required to use AI. So right now, if you look at AI at 3 different layers and 3 different levels of complexity, using a chatbot, fine-tuning an existing model, and training your own model, and look at those as 3 kind of difficulty levels today. Using a chatbot is the easiest thing to do, and it matches up to the education level of a typical scientist, right? I mean, if you look at about 73% of scientists have some Python experience. They're able to go to a browser, use a chatbot, maybe send in some data, do some retrieval or augmented generation, and be able to use that chatbot with the skill set and level of knowledge that they have. But the second you go to that next level of, hey, I want to fine tune a model on an arbitrary data set, now you're getting into some more complex topics. Now you've got data management issues. You have collaboration issues where You may have data coming from multiple different research centers, and you need to aggregate that together and organize it in a way to drive a fine-tuning story. So, and then the third level of, hey, I want to train my own model, that now you're into a world which is, I don't have the hardware, I don't have the institutional access to that infrastructure, and my Python skills and even my grant money don't match up anymore to the infrastructure, tooling, and software I need to be successful. But look, I think that if we're going to be successful as an industry, we need to invest in ensuring every single layer that I described, and there are many, many other layers that can be used here, are made accessible and democratized for every scientist. Because one of the things I said on another talk the other day was, Albert Einstein was a patent clerk. He didn't have access to the largest supercomputers in the world to do his research. And, the free expression of ideas today is kind of limited by how the industry is set up. And that's why you see such a leaning towards people who are trying to demonstrate an ROI from their very expensive models by saying, oh, look, my model will replace human beings, and therefore the return on investment exists because you don't need a lawyer anymore. You don't need a doctor anymore. You don't need that radiologist anymore. So, and I think that's just a kind of a artifact of the way the industry is currently set up and the valuations of the entities that are driving the creation of foundation models today. I think that, for AI to be truly successful in the scientific domain, it needs to be opened up. Even the open source models we described today are not truly open source models. So they're not open source like the internet would leverage it today. So I think there's some work to do. We have to do as researchers. The money exists, the infrastructure exists, but we have to invest in the accessibility layers, the usability layers, to make it so that the scientist who has got a data set, who's got Python experience, maybe they don't even have Python experience, maybe they're Excel aficionados, should be able to create models, gain access to AI, to adapt it to their data set, and integrate it also into the robotics elements of CRISPR labs or various other automated mechanisms of testing their hypotheses. But anyway, I think, look, that investment will happen. I think it will require some federal government leadership. It will require some institutional leadership. And ultimately, there will be some grassroots aspects to this as well. But that's the unlock that needs to happen now. It's not about, using the latest foundation model from OpenAI, because OpenAI's purpose in life right now is about replacing humans, because they can't justify their expense and cost unless they take that next step. But that next step is kind of orthogonal to making the next scientific discovery. I don't know if that helps answer your question, Michelle, but
yes,
that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, and I think I'd be interested to hear anyone's thoughts on this this next point, which Sid, you mentioned the idea about the ROI being incredibly important, especially for an organization that doesn't currently have AI employed in any of their workflows, because it is initially an upfront high cost. I'm going to be doing a talk on digital twins tomorrow, and it's very similar conversation. You need to demonstrate this great ROI, and the first thing that people go to is exactly what you said. Well, I'm not going to need that lawyer. I'm not going to need that radiologist. But is it about changing the perspective to really focus on collaboration and say, well, maybe I could use a fractional, percentage of the radiologist's time instead of it replacing the human? Maybe part of the human's time is going to be spent in collaboration with AI. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts.
Well, that's exactly it, Michelle. And I didn't say this first. It's been said a lot, but it should always be repeated. AI is not replacing humans, but it's 100% replacing humans that don't embrace AI. It's absolutely the case in every walk of life, in every field: lawyers, research, business, finance. It doesn't make a difference. And if anybody believes that that's not true, they'll be on the front end of that. They will be replaced, right? I absolutely believe that. But you did hit it on the head. AI is an augmenter It doesn't have to necessarily defend its ROI by reducing headcount costs, although there's absolutely capacity for that. We've faced a history all through all time of new changes displacing people because we're now able to do things much quicker and much faster, right? Everything from assembly lines, from manually assembled systems to research, exactly that. In the legal industry, for example, maybe it doesn't replace the lawyer. Sure as heck should replace the paralegal. Any paralegals out there, sorry for that, but I'm sorry, if one of your primary jobs is to edit a brief, we don't need paralegals to edit a brief. We've got the best editor ever, best syntax checker, the best consistency checker. Research, as long as it's got access to the data, it'll find that research, the needle in the haystack, much faster than a human paralegal. Now, a paralegal that puts themselves in that position where they wield those tools, they'll be valuable. But they'll also do the job of 2 paralegals or 3 paralegals or 4 paralegals. So that's unavoidable. It's completely unavoidable. This is no different than any of the other changes we've had throughout all of history, where we moved from horse and carriage to cars to computers and mobile phones that are now computers in our pocket. That'll be a terrible thing. It's happening, right? But it's not just headcount replacement. It also can be productivity gains. It can be revenue gains. It can be faster time to market. It can be, better return on marketing. So there's a lot of ways to measure the ROI. It doesn't just have to be reduction of headcount.
Yeah, it could also be in that optimization of the use of your headcount through looking for efficiencies in workflows. I keep coming back to that idea of, for the applied scientist, how can this be a collaboration? Where can machine learning assist in your day-to-day to make your life easier, to free up your big brain to come up with the great ideas instead of having to do those sort of day-to-day tasks?
But there's a crucial tailoring aspect that needs to be done. Let's go back to that paralegal kind of thought experiment for a moment. Unless the model is there's actually a very well-known use case now of a paralegal trying to be replaced, or a portion of a paralegal trying to be replaced, and they created a motion and put it into federal court, and it had invalid citations, it had incorrect standing documentation, and it got thrown out and laughed at.
Well, no, it cited cases that didn't exist. Yeah,
exactly. And there needs to be an investment in first of all, is this the right model to even be using? Large language models might be appropriate, but what is the right model to use? What is the fine tuning we're going to do on this model? Then how are we going to ensure mathematical proof level quality checking of the results, so that you can ensure the right citations and right logic tree is expressed in the result that's coming out the door? And I think in science it's no different. Look, you can lose your tenure in a heartbeat if you over depend upon some LLM to generate your research results, unless the right investment is done in ensuring quality of data, logical, analysis, and so on and so forth. And, that's where the ROI problem becomes suddenly very tricky, because investing in that layer of efficiency and automation may cost more than the actual overall productivity gain that's achieved. So, I think AI, you almost have to look at it as a low-hanging fruit exercise. When cloud came out, we looked at low-hanging fruit of where cloud was far more, going to be far more impactful than an on-premises deployed system. And that's where we went first. Similarly, with AI and science, we need to look for the low-hanging fruit, where the cost of the result is, not prohibitively expensive, and the impact is going to be, disproportionate in terms of productivity gain. And that means that for at least the near term, AI is, as you noted, Michelle, a augmenter. But even then, I think we need to look at it as something more than even large language models, because the capacity of large language models, I think, and its impact on science is kind of limiting. And we need to look at AI as more of, okay, neural networks have advanced a lot since 1970. A lot of disciplines haven't applied neural networks to their data set. What can we do now? Now that we've seen the algorithmic kind of steps being taken because of large language models. And unfortunately today, I see a lot of scientists go, AI equals large language models, which equals foundation models. Therefore, that I'm going to start with GPT or Llama or something of that sort and work through it. No, guys. Look, folks, let's look at the outcome you're trying to generate and then walk backwards into what model we need to create, what kind of tooling we need around that model to ensure a quality response, and then look at what resources we need to invest in, whether those are open source resources, hiring data scientists or applied scientists to create those models, and then look at the strategy. So more of an outcome-oriented approach, Michelle, is where I think a lot of scientists need to start. Unfortunately, currently I see a lot of, I've got a petabyte of oncology data set, CT scans. I'm going to throw it at this computer vision model that I found and see if it can detect pancreatic cancer. And that's super dangerous. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that thought process. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that machine learning and AI is just, it's really not open up. It's not easy enough for models to be trained yet that, the scientists with Python experience can drive that kind of an outcome. But I think that'll change. I genuinely believe the tooling will come to play. The applications will be built. And these research institutions will include that into the strategy. Right now, I think the strategy is a lot about let's go buy some hardware,
right,
and not enough about the tooling side. And I think we're already seeing hardware sitting idle because the tooling doesn't exist in a lot of these, supercomputing and scientific computing data centers. So I think this will change.
And Sid, I agree with you. And I think that one of the things that I'm observing is that rather than trying to do the work internally where there's a lack of expertise, there is a lot of partnering with when companies have budget to partner with data science experts who can actually build a new model for that outcome that they're looking for. So I agree with you. And I feel like this is a very organic transition to the next topic, which is looking to the future. AI, as we've all talked about, is evolving rapidly, and there are potential breakthroughs that seem somewhat limitless. Jericho, as an applied scientist, I'd love to start with you. What trends or advancements in AI do you find the most exciting when it comes to the future of scientific research?
So this may be a bit of a left fielder, but the advances in quantum computing are really quite exciting for this. We have accelerated, or in the past, we have seen accelerating computational capabilities across the market, and that has facilitated our current revolution in AI. Continuing that and working in spaces that are incredibly complex necessitates, exponential breakthrough, not just a continuation of what we see today, but altogether new capabilities. And quantum computing has actually seen a number of things. We've seen stuff come to market already that leverages quantum physics, such as just the SSD drives in most of our computers. But seeing this type of breakthrough in AI and having the computational capability, even for things like protein folding, an AI model that we've talked about some today, right? This is a very computationally expensive space if you exhaustively search it. So we leverage AI to short circuit that some and find things faster. If we can further accelerate that with quantum computing, it altogether opens up new landscapes of things we can achieve with these models and the complexity of the tasks that they can take on, which is today a fundamentally limiting component.
Yeah. Eric or Sid, I'd love to hear from you as well.
And
what aspects of the future are most exciting to you?
Well, Sid, I wanted to actually ask you a question. You talked a lot about hardware. What do you think about NVIDIA's Digits $3,000 supercomputer? Is that going a long way to help solve that problem, do you think?
No. NVIDIA, I'll just be candid, NVIDIA's business model currently is around driving the most expensive chipset they can into as many data centers as they can, as efficiently and quickly as they can, and driving reoccurring purchases as much as possible.
Well, of course, that's
Digits
what they do.
Digits basically
You just
ensures
espouse the mission of every for-profit company on the globe.
Well, yeah, but I think they take it a little too far.
Okay.
Like, so for example, 5 years ago, I could use GPUs that were used for computer gaming to train models.
Yeah.
And they've
but
now
the
taken.
3K doesn't help the research community. The 3K
not really.
It's because it's inadequate. It's inadequate.
It's inadequate. It comes down
I
to.
didn't know. I'm not in the research community. But Michelle, to your point about the future, I mean, my God, we've never had a more exciting time for the future. But what I really believe is the center of it is we must as an industry meaning those of us that are creating things for other companies, research organizations, and the like to use, must put humans at the center of this, not the other way around. For example, we created software at IgniteTech that clones SMEs, their knowledge, their video, their audio. They look and sound like the SME, your head of HR, your head of legal, because all of these people, this is common in any organization, research organization or for-profit organization. These people are constantly inundated with the same questions over and over and over and over because they are the source of truth. And it's emails and it's video meetings and chats and the like. But what if you could suddenly be in multiple places at once and answer questions 24/7 and in multi-languages? If you're a global company, anybody could ask your head of HR a policy question. And we then have tethered our technology back to the owner through a mobile app that if the model can't answer the clone, the AI clone, or what we call a persona, if the persona can't answer the question, it goes and contacts the owner and asks the owner, hey, I got a question that I can't answer. It wasn't in the knowledge that you built me with. Can you answer this? The owner answers that question, and when they do, it updates the knowledge. So the next time that question comes in, it doesn't go to the owner. So it keeps getting smarter and smarter. So that's putting humans at the center of it. We're now freeing up these SMEs to do things that are much more impactful to the org, other than being the constant source of the same information over and over again. And I think that's the future direction. The direction is to get away from the techie aspect of this. And it's highly techie. I go to a lot of conferences, speak at a lot of conferences, super techie, and I'm watching poor people's eyes just glass over at so many of the terms, and bring it back to, how would you like to have more time in your day? Here's how it works, right? I think the future has got to be the melding of putting humans at the center of it and making them the puppet master of AI, not feeling like a victim of AI, you're displacing my job. No. Let's just can't we just get rid of, I don't know, pick a number, 40%, 50%, 60% of all the mundane stuff you do? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Everybody on this call thinks that. They all think it'd be fantastic, because then you could spend the other time on much more important, interesting things.
Yeah.
I think when you look to the future, multiple Nobel Prizes have now been awarded due to the impact of AI on a particular discipline. But the accessibility layers are just not there. Like, I look at my own niece. She's a med student. She wanted to train a machine learning model for a cancer research project she was doing. She's, kind of struggled through it, ended up with some MATLAB model, and then she was limited by how far she could take it with MATLAB. And she was just falling over herself to try to leverage machine learning within her particular discipline. And I think there's a world out there where, and it's not that far away, where a student, and basically a level playing field for scientists, regardless of budget or grant size, where they can start out, training a model on their local endpoint, their local laptop, move to more advanced resources that are publicly available from our leading research institutions with a very small nominal budget, move to quantum computing resources that are, the qubits that are published by some of the folks who are leaders in quantum computing, and do that in a seamless development experience, and scaling from, I'm just a garage, scientist trying to tinker and see if there's an application of machine learning in my discipline to now I want to scale a production level model acceptable for inference by a broad entire discipline, and getting to that level of kind of scalable access that is also fine-tuned to the amount of money they have. It's only around the corner. And when that happens, we'll see AI as a universal tool in science. It'll be just as ubiquitous as a Bunsen burner or a mass spectrometer is in various disciplines today. And we're not there yet today. It requires too much jargon. It requires too much skill set. It requires too much computer science, honestly. But we're not too far from it. It'll be a combination of open source. It'll be a combination of for-profit companies where it's not just about renewing the next sale. It's a lot about renewing the next sale while still driving an ROI and an outcome for the actual end customer. Ensuring that if they do make a $20 million supercomputer deployment, that it'll be at 80% utilization in 3 months or 6 months for that customer. So the customer sees a benefit from that large AI investment they made. But the flip side of that future is a scary proposition. Billions of dollars have gone into massive computing clusters across the United States right now to fund the next AI wave. And if we don't show the scientific results from that massive federal and private enterprise investment in AI infrastructure, you can have almost a deflationary action occur because of that. So I caution that if we don't solve this problem, we're going to see almost like a rip back of, look, I put a $500 million supercomputer deployment in the state of New York, expecting all this AI application and use by a bunch of professors, and I didn't see it. I'm not doing that again. That didn't really get me the result I expected. So I think we need to be cautioned. We need to solve this problem with some urgency as well, because otherwise we won't be getting the results we want from the massive investments we're making in AI infrastructure today, with the hope that it accelerates science and drives new outcomes.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you to each of our panelists. I am conscious of the time, and I did take a look through our audience questions, and actually I think we've addressed the majority of them in the points that we've talked about. There is one here that I think would be a great way to end today's discussion, which is, how can the broader scientific community work together to maximize the benefits of AI while mitigating its risks? Simple question for everyone to end on.
Sure, I'm happy to take a stab at this. I think one of the key elements in mitigating risks to the scientific community, so people have talked a lot about job displacement and risks to workforces and just by using the models. I think the key thing is focus on the elements that are going to remain human. So we talked about, Eric mentioned, if you could have 40, 50, 60% of your time back in a day, that would be great. And we are profoundly good at finding ways to be busy. If you take away some mechanical task from my job, I will still find 8 hours of things to get done in a day. I'll just do more of the things that humans are good at. And so that's the key element here. So when we talk about science specifically, this is the thing like having conversations with people, sharing new discoveries, democratizing new research that you think is important, and even finding ways to integrate with other projects that exist. So by going and having these conversations, you might find ongoing research that's not yet published. No model can tell you, no AI model can tell you about it. And it may not find it unless you are looking for that type of research yourself. So by having these conversations, by networking as people, like we're doing on this call today, we can build more community links. And those links are what allows scientists to do groundbreaking research. We have to work with larger teams, and that's a human element that AI is not going to replace. We can then use AI to facilitate this type of work, to find potential links that you might want to form. I'll segue over to, or I'll pass it over to Sid or Eric, if you have anything to add to the line of reasoning I'm taking this down.
No, I think you're dead on and spot on. I think just one thing I'd add to that is look, what made the internet successful was a unique combination of great commercial work combined with some good government sponsorship and open standards development. And that open standards part is, I think, an area where we're going to need to see some thought leadership by the research community. I think AI is definitely lacking in the standards world of consistent, API standards, interoperability standards, infrastructure utilization standards. And I think if we invest some time in, I think as Eric said, creating the standards like we had for TCP/IP and applying that to some of the underlying, connectivity required for AI, we'll see that democratization be a little bit easier to achieve. So that's one thing I would kind of layer on is, standards bodies sometimes make people want to not be interested in something. This is one place where moving fast and breaking things is great, but we should invest a little bit in standards.
Right. We're at time. Thank you, Eric, Sid, and Jericho. Really great discussion today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate
Wonderful.
it.
Enjoyed it. Very lively. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you,
for having me.
everyone. Unfortunately, like Michelle has said, this session has now come to an end. Like all the talks from throughout the day, this talk will now be available to view on demand for the next 30 days. I just want to just say once again a big thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today, and for our viewers, thank you very much for watching, and we will look forward to seeing you again at the next talk.
Thank you.